is somewhat interrelated. One is a Gemara which has been used classically in recent period to be the basis for the idea of a mechitza and a show, and then basically the rest of the daf is going to be an extended agadata around the idea of Yetzer Hara. So it'll be an interesting daf. Let's take a look. 7 lines from the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Bet. B'motzei Yom Tov. So the Mishnah says, the first night following Yom Tov, they would go into the Ezrat Nashim and they would fix it up really well, make a tikkun gadol, and then they would start the partying for the Simchat Beit HaShoeva parties, which would take place at the night and go into the next morning, where they would draw the water from the well. So, my tikkun gadol, says the Gemara, what was this big fixing up that they did? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, said Rabbi Eliezer, like we taught in a Mishnah in Midot, Chalakai tahazara, but Chalakai tabarishana. Originally, the azara was smooth, was flat, the Ezrat Nashim. Vikifua gizustara, and they surrounded it with a gizustara, some type of a protrusion. V'itkinu shu nashim yoshvot milamala ve'anashim milamata. And they made it that women should sit above and men should sit below. So the first balcony in a show. Now, there actually is an interesting debate here, based on a Rambam and Paris Mishnayos and others, exactly what the Lamala and Lamata is and what the Gezustera is. Some say a Gezustera, because if you think about it, if you talk about women above, that suggests the idea of a balcony, but it's contrasting it to the fact that it used to be smooth and flat. Well, making a balcony doesn't exactly make a place, the floor not flat. So, I mean, I guess you have, you could have poles supporting the balcony. So some say that what we're talking about here is protrusions. Rashi says it means that the walls were flat, were smooth, and then they made protrusions from the wall to support a balcony, which would be supported by the protrusions. Others say that it actually means that it would be less of a balcony and more, it's really the two types of mechitza, that we use nowadays. More, there would be some type of a posts behind which the women would stand, but maybe like a raised platform on which the women would stand. There would be a raised platform on the floor. So are we basically sort of saying, if here's your floor of your azara, are we basically saying that they would, and here's your walls, are we basically saying that they would make like protrusions from the walls and make, sort of like things like this, so you could stand here on the balcony? Or are we saying that you would make actually, like platforms maybe, like that they would stand on the platforms or something like that. I know that why exactly you would need platforms is not clear if you're standing behind a wall, but I guess if you want to see and you're standing behind something, you want it to be a little bit raised. Anyway, the simpler sense about above and below is that it was some type of a balcony.
Yeah,
okay.
Steinsaltz said it's from a Greek word, which means a projection from the side of the house upon which boards are laid. In other words, a balcony.
Gezustera. Yeah, that's what Rashi says. That's the protrusion. There is a Rambam in Paris Mishnayos, though, I believe, that is suggests more something like being behind some type of a barrier. But yes, clearly this is the simple sense of this is a balcony. Okay, and the women should be above and the men below. So there you go. So they made a balcony for the women. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Rishona hayu nashimi bifnim v'nashimi b'chutz, and here's part of also why it's confusing, is because whereas the previous thing pointed to the idea of a sense of a balcony, this suggests more explicitly the other sense of this of a type of what we have in a contemporary context of a division of men and women. Well, again, depends which shul you're in, but anyway, the standard type of a mechitza, when with different sections. The women would be on the inside and the men on the outside. Now, inside and outside what? So Rashi says it could mean even outside the Ezras Nashim, on the Harabayas, which is pretty interesting. That would lead to levity, to inappropriate type of mixing of the sexes, too much maybe sexual tension in the air or something. So they put the women on the outside and the men on the inside. No idea why that's supposed to make things better. I guess it's who's coming late and which section you have to cut through to get to the other section or something. I don't know. And it still led to too much frivolity. So then they said, rather than side by side, which there's some opportunity of interaction, I guess as you're crossing over or maybe at the edges, they had the women totally above and the men below, which completely prevented that. Okay, so that's sort of what preceded the above and below. Now, so here they made this whole separation of the sexes, and they would do that before this big party. So, how could they do that? The Haksiv, does the verse not say, everything from the hand of God, from the written hand of God, to me was revealed, and that is about the construction of, Hamelech is saying it about the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. I mean, God was, the prophets, God and Nathan was sort of revealing this to, through David about how the Beis HaMikdash had to be constructed. Now, that's quite fascinating as a question for a couple of reasons. Number one, that was Bayis Rishon. This is Bayis Sheni. Number two, Bayis Sheni was already significantly different than the Bayis Rishon. Number three, this is the Ezrat Nashim, which is not technically part of the Beis HaMikdash. So anyway, that's whatever the question is. Not exactly clear what the question is, but let's see what the Gemara's answer is. Amar Rav, so Rav said, Kra ashkechu v'darish. They found the pasuk and they explicated it to justify making this modification. What was the pasuk? V'saftar it's mishpachos levad. This is a pasuk in Zechariah talking about the war of Armageddon, and that there'll be much, the nations will surround Israel, and there'll be a war, and then there'll be death in the war, and the land will eulogize for those that have died in the war. We'll see in a minute the Gemara is going to identify a particular figure that has died in the war. Every family separately. Mishpachas Beis David Levad, the family of Beit David by themselves, V'nishehem Levad, and V'nishehem Levad, and their wives alone. And then it says Mishpachas Beis Natan, I think Levad, V'nishehem Levad. So first of all, each family is doing their own eulogizing in separate groups, and each group within each family, the men and the women are separate. So you see, Amru, they said, look, we can make from this a kavachomer. In the future time, at a time of a funeral, everybody's eulogizing the ein yetzer hara sholik behen, and they also don't have the evil inclination. The evil inclination doesn't have dominion over them. So what does that mean? So it could just mean that's an explication of oskim behesped, that if you're busy mourning and at the aftermath of a great tragedy, it's not usually a time when there's a lot of sexual desire. Everybody's in a very different type of a mood. But the other thing that Rashi also adds here, getting to what the Gemara is going to say in a minute, is if this is a messianic vision, at that time, there will no longer be a Yetzer Hara. So, it's not just that at that moment of the Hesped, but at that time in history, the Yetzer Hara will have been negated. And even so, Amar Torah, Anoshim Levad v'Noshim Levad, that men and women have to be separate. Achshav, nowadays, She'oskim b'simcha, number one, it's all this joy and frivolity, and that usually can lead to heightening, to enticing sexual desire and so on, and it leads you to be frivolous and get carried away. V'yetzer hara sholik behem, again, that could be just explicating the reality of oskim b'simcha, or again, as Rashi says, it's a period of history in which there's a reality of a Yetzer Hara. Alachas kama v'kama, how much more so do we need to keep the men and the women separate? So this is why they felt they were justified in making some modification. Again, not even clear. It sounds like it was, anyway, again, another reason why this isn't even so much of a question is that it sounds like it was a temporary modification, right? It sounds like if they had to do it every year, then obviously they didn't keep it from year to year. So, but whatever it was, whether they needed it to justify actually making the change, or whether it was just the question about where did they get the idea in the first place that they should keep the men and women separate, it quotes this idea from this mourning period, La'asi Lavo. Now, here's the interesting thing, okay? And this is not a shir on mechitza, so I'm not going to go into detail about this. But there is no statement anywhere in the Gemara that you need a mechitza between men and women during davening. There's no statement that men and women were mixed during davening. There's no statement that men and women were separate during davening. There's no statement anyway, one way or the other, which could mean, there was an established practice and it didn't need to be commented on. But it's quite interesting that there is not an explicit statement. So it clearly is recorded historically as a practice from the time of the Gaonim on. We don't have any evidence earlier what exactly the practice was. The explicit historical evidence is from the time of the Gaonim on, where they were sitting men and women separate. It It didn't need to be justified. It was just taken for granted. It became needed to be justified in the more modern period, starting with the Chassam Sofer. This was even before the reformers challenged it. Actually, early reformers in Europe did not have mixed seating. Mixed seating, I believe, somebody could correct me, began in America.
I think in Albany.
In Albany.
Yeah.
So anyway, but the Chassam Sofer did not need to defend it against the reformers. But anyway, but it was a time where there was a fascinating tshuva where the Tsar was visiting St. Petersburg, I think, and they wanted to welcome him in the main synagogue in St. Petersburg, and they wanted to have a mixed choir singing for him, and they asked the Chassam Sofer whether they were allowed to. So it led to a whole discussion about Kol B'Isha Erva, but also discussion of keeping men and women separate. So when it first became this issue of the need to explicate the importance of keeping men and women separate in davening, this Gemara became one of the primary sources which was used to explain why men and women have to be kept separate during davening, because it speaks about, look, they kept men and women separate during the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Now the problem, and it's interesting again also because it has the two models of how they were kept separate, with a balcony or with separate, like in separate sections. The only problem is that this Gemara is either way too narrow or way too broad. It's too narrow because you could say, look, fine, they kept them separate in the middle of having a huge party and frivolity and whatever. Okay, fine, that doesn't mean when you're davening. So fine, but the Gemara says it's a kavachomer from the case about eulogizing, when there's no frivolity and everything is super serious, and even there you have to keep them separate. But then it becomes too broad, then you would have to keep men and women separate at all times. So exactly how from this Gemara you get to this middle position that you keep men and women separate during davening, but not just at times of frivolity, and not at all times, is a little bit unclear. But this Gemara is, for many, a major basis or textual support for the idea of a mechitza during davening, and the issue about whether it's in a balcony or whether it's side by side and so on is also a fun question about what the purpose of that separation is. If a balcony suffices, then the purpose, or a balcony is what they did in the end, then the purpose of the separation has to do with intermingling, not with seeing one another, because you can see one another pretty well from a balcony. If the issue is about, if it's more about the sort of side by side separation, or a wall type of a separation, which some want to say is what was being referred to, then maybe there's an issue of seeing one another as opposed to the intermingling. The simple sense of this Gemara, I would say, much more underscores the aspect of the intermingling, and that also is very relevant for questions about the nature, if you use this Gemara as your source for the nature of mechitza. Yes, Joe? What?
There was a balcony.
Of course it was a balcony? How do you know?
In the show and the
Yeah, in Europe. Yeah, right. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. So that is, anyway, yes.
How do you know that Kalvin Rosh is specifically sexual?
From this, all right, from this Gemara you don't, but of course, Boimli de Kalos Rosh as a concern because the men and the women were mixing, and it wouldn't be a concern when they weren't mixing. They were having just as much torch juggling and drinking and dancing without, so if that's not Kalos Rosh, but once you get to mixing, it is Kalos Rosh. It seems like it has something to do with that. Anyway, you'd have to look at other sugyot, but it seems that it is related. Okay, so now we're going to take a look. Now, it's also worth noting the association of Yetzer Hara, before it was Kalos Rosh, but Yetzer Hara, with this issue of this intermingling of men and women, and how much is Yetzer Hara identified with sexual desire, or is it just more generally? I was just reading an article last night. This Gemara gave me the reason to read an article that I had seen before, but hadn't, and maybe had read, but anyway, I don't think I had a chance to read before, which is about the development of the concept of Yetzer Hara from the Tannaitic through the Amoraic period. We tend to think about, if you ask what is sort of the rabbinic understanding of Yetzer Hara, we tend to think it's often internalized. We speak about Yetzer Hara in contrast to Yetzer HaTov. It's sort of your struggle with your more appetitive desires, as opposed to your id, as opposed to your super ego, your better side, your worse side. So we internalize it, and we often think very much that it often is associated maybe primarily or largely with sexual desire. So those are some classic characteristics that we have of Yetzer Hara. So but this article basically said that actually the earlier understandings of it didn't have either of those. Saw it as an external force. If you just even look at the phrase Yetzer Hara Sholeit Bahem. So is Sholeit an internal Sholeit, or Sholeit like this demonic force that has power over us, right? Is it more a sense of like, a demonic power of evil that entices us, but it's externalized? And maybe it's not specifically about like, appetitive desires that can be channeled for good, sort of the drive, all these types of drives which can be, it can also be productive. Maybe it's just this sense of an enticement to do evil, like an external demonic power that is enticing us to sin, and it's not specific about sex, and it's not about an appetitive drive. So, and how it sort of transitions from that externalized type of a thing to this internalized, struggle with also desires, which also can be seen as powerful desires that can be channeled for better. So anyway, it's interesting here as well that as we read this Succah, because a lot of this, we're going to now discuss the rest of the daf discussing Yetzer Hara, and a lot of this also, there's an interesting parallel in Breshit Rabbah by the pasuk of, where God says to Cain, he says, Lapeta chatat rovetz, vatatim shalbo, that which is seen as referring like the Yetzer Hara is external and it's trying to entice you to Gehenna, but you can have control over it. And there's really, again, this sort of model of this other idea of this externalized idea. So let's sort of take a look and see how that develops. But here certainly it is, it is first being introduced to us in the context of sexual desire. Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, the Mishnah only says Tikkun Gadol, and it's a Tosefta that gives the details.
Yes.
If it were that important, why didn't Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi include it in the Mishnah?
That important for what? For this whole...
I'm
not discussing what the contemporary argument for Mechitza. Okay?
Anyway,
but it is a Mishnah in Mido. What do you mean it's not? What do you mean it's that important? It's just a historical point. It's only important... You mean if you decide that you're going to use this as your basis for your understanding? Fine. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, it is a Mishnah in Midos. Sure. Yes.
There was a science fiction film called Forbidden Planet.
Yes.
And it had the concept that the actually external physical reality, but it was created by the mind.
Aha.
They were on this level. This culture, the civilization was on this level.
Interesting.
But it was the mind created it and created an external force that then was the negative force.
Interesting. Nice way of bringing those together. Right. Okay, so let's take a look at the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Now, what was the point of this eulogy? So, Pligiba Rabbi Dos of Rabbanan. So it's the debate of Rabbi Dos and the rabbis. Mashiach ben Yosef Sheneharag. It's the Messiah, the son of Yosef. Now, some people have never heard of Mashiach ben Yosef. It's not really anywhere explicit, but it is a rabbinic understanding that in the what do you call it? In the vision of Armageddon in Zechariah, it speaks about obviously this whole war against Israel, and and there's a lot of death and whatever, and finally Mashiach comes. So the rabbis understand that part of who will lead them into war is Mashiach ben Yosef. Where did they get this idea? Because the pasuk says, "Vaya beis Yosef eish, beis Yosef eish." What is it? Yaakov lehava, vaya Esav lekash. So a vision about how the destroying of the enemies of Esav or whatever is by comparing the house of Yosef to a fire. That the original, sort of leader that will lead the war against the enemies will be from the house of Yosef. Will be Mashiach ben Yosef, and he'll die in the war, and then will arise Mashiach ben David, who will be the ultimate Mashiach. So it says, so that's who they're mourning, Mashiach ben Yosef Sheneharag. No, the evil inclination will be killed because then it'll be the messianic time. So it's good if you say it was Mashiach ben, meaning as an explanation of the verse, it was Mashiach ben Yosef who was murdered. Dakaru, they will look towards me that which had been like sort of pierced through, that which the person who had been murdered. The saftu alav k'misped ala yachid, and they will mourn over him like the mourning over a single, your only child. Ella, so it's a human being who was killed. And this is referring to this period after this, in this war of Armageddon. Elamant Amar al Yetzer Hara Shenerag, but if it was the evil nation, highest beta ba'elamebed. What you're going to do a eulogy? Simcha ba'elamebed. You should be doing a rejoicing. So it's funny because you assumed that it was going to have a problem with the verse. Forget the verse. The verse could be talking about whoever it's talking about. But why are you eulogizing? You should be having a party. Amai bachu. Why do they cry? Kedarish Rabbi Yehuda, as Rabbi Yehuda explains, Lasid Lavo in the future time. Where am I? God will bring the evil inclination, v'shochto b'fnei tzadikim, and slaughter it in front of the righteous, u'b'fnei rishaim, and in front of the evil people. Tzadikim nidmelem kehar gavoa. For the righteous, it looks like this huge mountain. V'rishaim nidmelem kechut se'ara, and for the wicked, it looks like a hair, one thread of hair. Halalu bochim, balalu bochim. These go and cry, and these go and cry. Tzadikim bochim omim, the righteous cry and say, Hey, yechonu lichvosh har gavoa kazeh. How do we ever have the ability to conquer this huge mountain? V'shayim bochim omim, and the wicked go and cry, and they say, Hey, lo yechonu lichvosh eschut hase'ara. How are we not able to overcome this tiny little thread? And even God is astounded with them. So says the Lord of hosts. If it would be astounding in the eyes of this people in those days, even in my eyes it'll be astounding. Now, I don't know what this means. First of all, I will tell you a brilliant insight that the Marsha has about the mountain and the hair. He says that's Har Seir. So he says, because Esav is often, sort of seen as not just the enemies of the Jews, whatever, but it represents the evil forces against the Jews, the Yetzer Hara. So Har Seir is sort of the paradigm enemy. So it could be, the human enemy, it could be the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, Esav lives on Har Seir. So that's the Har, the mountain, and the Seir, the hair. So that was very cute. But what is this idea that, first of all, the righteous are crying? Why are they crying? There's no Yetzer Hara. So Rashi says they're crying because they're crying over how difficult, they're remembering how hard it was in the course of their lives to struggle with the Yetzer Hara. So they're crying over all of their past struggles. The Marsha says, first he says, the Pshat sounds like they're crying out of joy. Okay, but he says, but that doesn't work. Then you're not having a hesped. So he says, maybe he says they're crying because they're now losing the opportunity to have this religious struggle in order to gain all the reward that they were gaining. Now that's not, now it's easy for everybody. We were living up to the struggle. Anyway, it's hard to understand exactly why the righteous are struggling. What's also hard to understand is why it looks to the righteous like a mountain and like the wicked like a hair. Right? Because it sounds like that it should be the other way around. And it sounds like that this is like, what they say, like the scales fall from their eyes, like the truth is revealed. So you sort of get it. You get the idea that somebody who's wicked and feels like, it's so hard for them to live up to their, to fight their temptations. It's so hard for them to do the right thing that, that in a way they're like fooling themselves. That really if they could have a little willpower, they could start making things better and they could start acting in the right way. And if the scales fell from their eyes, they would realize it's not as hard as they think it is. It just needs a little change of direction, a little willpower, and so on. So that you could see that, like, it becomes revealed to them that it was not as difficult as they thought. It was like a hair, it wasn't a mountain. But what does the opposite mean for the tzaddikim? If you, by that analogy, it means that for the tzaddikim, it seemed like it was very easy, but it was really this huge mountain. So I suppose what that would mean is that if you're really like working on yourself and you're constantly working to be better and so on, a lot of things, that normally would be, it's like when you start, it's like if you're an exerciser, right? So, and you start getting better and better. Like, I know a lot of people that they went from nothing to running a marathon. Like, you say, like, that's completely impossible. I could never imagine it, right? But, you slowly train and you make a lot of incremental, improvements bit by bit. And next thing you know, you're doing it and it's not a challenge because, you're not going from here to here. Every time you're just taking a little step. But after a while, but then you realize, oh my God, how the heck did I do that? How was I able to run a marathon? A year ago, I couldn't run a marathon. But when you're in the middle of it, like it's maybe if you're on the right path and you're exercising the muscles correctly, it's not such a challenge. So I think that's what it's saying, that, the scales fall from their eyes. And maybe for the tzaddikim, maybe if they didn't experience it like a har, but that's because they were, cause if you experience it like a har, then you're just going to give up hope. But if you sort of focus on getting a little bit better, then when you look back and you can realize, oh my God, how did I accomplish that? All right, again, why exactly you're crying, I don't know, but okay. So now the Gemara says like this. Okay, and then God is also astounded, like presumably astounded at the Rishayim. Like, I don't get it, guys. How could you not have done it? It was not as hard as you made it seem. Like, and how do you stray so far? Or maybe he's astounded at the tzaddikim that they managed to accomplish that much. Okay. Rabbi Yassi, Yetzer Hara betchila doma l'chut shebuchya. The Yetzer Hara originally is like a spider web. It's not even such a big Yetzer Hara. This gets back to the chut hase'ara. Tiny little temptations. And by the end, it's like the cords used to pull a wagon, like really thick cords. Okay, meaning if the little temptations, if you don't give in to them, then you're free from them. But once you start giving into one, then you do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. You're deep into a habit of going down the wrong path, of doing the wrong things. And it's very, very hard to break away from those addictions and those habits. Shene'emar hoy moshchei ha'aven bechevlei hashav. Woe to those who draw the sin upon them with ropes of nothingness. So that's like a spider thread. Spider webs, and like the cords of the wagon, they'll bring upon them sin. So it begins from nothing, and look how thick it becomes and impossible to break free of. Tanu Rabbanan, Mashiach ben David, Atid lihigalopim herabi Yameinu. So very fast, but very powerful Gemaras we just read about sort of the psychological realities of addiction and behavior and habit and all of those. So Tanu Rabbanan, a rabbi start Mashiach ben Yosef. Where were we? Mashiach ben David, Shatid Ligalopim Her B'Yameinu. Mashiach ben David, you normally just call Mashiach, but again, because here we're in a discussion on Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. So Mashiach ben David, that will eventually be revealed quickly in our days. Omer lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God says to him in the future time, Sha'al mimeni davar ve'atein lecha. Ask for me anything and I'll give it to you. Shene'emar. And then this is a pasuk in the beginning of Tehillim, Perek Bet, and if you look in the context, it is about Mashiach. It says the following. It says, Sapra el chok. I will talk about the decree. I today have given birth to you, meaning today I have revealed that you are the Mashiach. Ask from me anything, and I'll give the nations as your inheritance. But then when Mashiach ben David sees that Mashiach ben Yosef has been killed in war, he says to God, Master of the universe, I don't want anything. I don't want to conquer all the nations. All I want is life. Maybe he means I want to live life for myself. I don't want to die like Mashiach ben Yosef. Maybe he means life for the world, that there will never be death anymore. But he sees all of the death, and rather than wanting more of like this worldly thing of conquering the nations, he wants a different type of a reality. He wants life. Omer lo, so God says to him, Chaim, life. Before you asked for it, David had already prophesied that you would be given life. He has asked from you life, you have given it to him. This is a mizmor that is about all the ways in which God has given amazing things to the king, and presumably this is being read as the King Mashiach. Okay, so that was just going back to the Mashiach theme, but again about sort of a switching about Lasid Lavo. So now we hear that Lasid Lavo, there won't be a Yetzer Hara, and there also won't be death. But the Gemara isn't going to be focusing on Lasid Lavo. That's other Gemaras. This Gemara is going to go back to be focusing on Yetzer Hara. Darish Rabbi Rabbi Tem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Shiva Shemot, 7 names. Yeshlo the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara has 7 names. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Karo Ra. God called it evil. Shenemar ki Yetzer Lev Adam Ra min Urav. Moshe Karo Arel, uncircumcised. Shenemar umaltem isar las levavchem. You should circumcise the foreskin of your heart. David Karo Tamei. David called it impure. Shenemar leiv tahor barali Elokim. God made for me a pure heart. Nichlal diika tamei. That means there's such a thing as an impure heart. Shlomo Karo sonei. Shlomo called it a hater or an enemy, whatever, a hated one. Shene'emar im ra'ev son acha, if the one you hate is hungry, he'echilehu lechem, feed him bread. And if he's thirsty, give him water. Because you're really doing is you're dumping coals on his head. So be nice to your enemies, and it'll get them. It'll get under their skin. It'll be worse for them than being mean to them. Okay, Vashem Yishalem Lecha, and God will pay you back. Altuki Yishalem Lecha, do not read will pay you back. Eli Yashlimenu Lecha, will have you make peace with it. So Rashi says what this means is it's alluding to. So anyway, so it's being read as not literally your enemies, but the Yetzer Hara. And what does it mean? Give him bread and give him water. And Rashi says it means choose Torah. So if your Yetzer Hara is hungry and you have a desire to sin and it wants to be fed with sin, instead of feeding it with sin, feed it with Torah. And then you'll make peace with it and you'll be able to redirect your Yetzer. Okay? Yeshayahu karo michshol. Yeshayahu called it a stumbling block. Shenemar solu panu darech. Clear out the way. Harimu michshol midarchami. Remove the stumbling block from the way of my people. Yechezkel karo even. Yechezkel called it a stone. Shenemar vasirotias leiv ha'even mi b'sarchem. I remove the stone of heart from your flesh. V'nasati lachem leiv basar. Yoel karo tzifoni. Yoel called it the either northern one or the hidden one. I will distance the tzifoni from you. It's interesting to note, based on the point I made before, how some of these images are external and some are internal. I don't know if you picked that up, right? The uncircumcised heart, the stone heart, the pure heart, that's all very internal, right? As opposed to the stumbling block, the enemy, the impure, what was the first one? The evil, there's a very almost shift between external and internal here. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. This is the evil inclination. That it is hidden and standing in the heart of a man. So there you get it internalized. I will push it away to a barren and desolate land. To a place where there's no people, so it will not be able to sort of entice other people, make trouble with other people. So there you got to talk about it being externalized. It's sort of like I'll take it out from being inside of you and cast it away from people. So it's a lot of this mix here of this internal, external. So fine. So this is again quoting sections of the pasuk and then as it were, interpreting it. So I will have it face the eastern sea. So this is reading Yam as the Beit HaMikdash because everybody gathers. Like everyone, it's like a Gam collects all the waters. Everybody gathers to the Beit HaMikdash, and Kadmon meaning the first Beit HaMikdash. Shenatani na b'Mikdash Rishon. That it looked that the Yetzer Hara put its eyes towards the first Beit HaMikdash v'cherivo and caused it to be destroyed or destroyed it. V'harag Talmidei Chachamim shabo and killed all of the sages or whatever Torah scholars in them. The Sofor Yamacharon, its end I will place towards the western sea. What does that mean? That it also gave its eyes towards the second Beit HaMikdash, v'cherivo, and destroyed it. V'harag Talmidei Chachamim shabo. Okay, and its stench will go up, and its stench will go up. Because it abandons the other nations and it focuses its energies on the Jewish people. What a disgusting thing to do. Because it acts so great, because it has done largely, usually. It basically it entices the Torah sages. We mentioned Talmidei Chachamim twice before by destroying the Batei HaMikdash and the Talmidei Chachamim, which is an interesting putting together. What's the point of Talmidei Chachamim together with Beit HaMikdash? Anyway, and the Rabbi says, and the Yetzer Hara focuses on the Talmidei Chachamim more than anyone else. Okay, what does that mean? Like Abaye, Shamilahu Gavra, he heard a person, so this is a very famous Gemara, he heard a person, he said to a woman, let's get up early and go take a long walk together on the way. Amar Ezil Afarshinu Misura. He said, I'm going to travel along with them. I'm going to sort of sneak behind them and make sure that it doesn't that I can separate them from sin. It sounds to me like it's a little assignation. Who knows what they're planning on doing? I'll make sure that I'll prevent them. Azu Basraihu plus a parsi. He followed them for 3 parsangs, which is whatever that is. That's 4 mil. A mil is a kilometer, like 12 kilometers. What is that? Like 8 miles or something. Okay, so. The agma in agma is like what is it, like not a swamp, like a field, yeah, sometimes marsh. Okay, kihavi parshi miadadi. Then they came to a crossroads and they had to go their separate ways. Shaminuhu the ka'amri. He heard them say one to another, Archan rechikin. It was a very long journey. V'tzavsim b'sima, and how pleasing was the company. Thank you so much. You made it such an easy trip. It was so nice to be able to walk and to talk to somebody while we were going on our journey. So, and they didn't do anything wrong. So Amar Abaye, Abaye said, Iman desani li have. If that was the person who was hated to me, which means himself, but he's speaking euphemistically, like Soneam Sheh Yisrael, lo have mati l'ukmei nafshe, I would not have been able to withstand the temptation. So he says he couldn't believe that this person was able, these people were able to do it, and he imagines himself in that situation. He could not have withstood the temptation. So Azal Tala Nafshe Bibur Didarsha, he grew very despondent. He thought that he was at this very high religious level, and he realized that how he would have been tempted. So he went. One also has to wonder about the whole idea about sneaking behind them or whatever. Seems a little bit, as well, sort of indicating a certain, desire there. So anyway, he went and he leaned against the beam of a door. And he was in anguish. Asa, who Saba, a certain elder came, Tanale, and taught to him. The greater a person is, the greater his Yetzer Hara is. Okay, so this is a very famous line called and exactly what it's trying to say. And going back to the point I raised before about externalizing or internalizing, you could read it both ways. Look, there's a famous midrash that Rashi quotes, right at the beginning of, Vayarlikim es kol asher savine tov ma'od zu Yetzer Hara. So what does it mean, tov ma'od zu Yetzer Hara? I mean, why is that tov ma'od? So the Ramban has one interesting reading, which means tov ma'od means it's largely good, mostly good. The part that isn't good is the Yetzer Hara. But it seems like the Medrash is trying to say something else, right? Because it says, Ze Yetzer Hara, she'll malid the Yetzer Hara, lo bana adam bayis, lo nasa adam isha, right? If the Yetzer Hara is this drive in you, so the drive can be channeled, like, to be acquisitive, to whatever, but it can be channeled to be good things, like, okay, so you'll build a huge shul and you'll put your name on it, but at least you build a huge shul, you have ambition, but you have that ambition translated into doing good for the world, right? Or, there's sexual desire, but sexual desire can be fulfilled in the context of a family and raising kids and connecting to another person. So these drives can be channeled and can be very good and can make the world a much better place. So read that way, where we're sort of talking about Yetzer Hara as these internal drives, you could say is exactly true. Some of the great people in the world, what pushes them to be great is that they have very strong drives, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the biggest Talmud Chacham Yitzra Gadol Himenu, but that somebody, very, very driven. And people could be driven and do very bad things, and people could be driven and do very good things. Sometimes some of the people that are great public people also, have you find out about their private lives, and their sort of Yetzer Hara is finding its outlet in other ways there too, right? But it could speak about the point of what it means about having these sort of powerful drives and how they are channeled. The problem with that, although obviously I think that there's obviously an enormous amount of truth to that, is that it could also be used as a license. Like, see, I'm such a great person. I got such a strong Yetzer Hara, so I could be excused, therefore, if I'm going to go ahead and do these various types of things, because I've just got such a big Yetzer Hara. So anyway, that's a real big problem. But I think as a psychological point about what it means to have these very powerful drives and the way they could lead. The other possibility of the Gemara here, seeing it not as internal but externalized, I think Yetzer Hara leaves the Umos HaOlam and focuses on Yisrael. Well, what does that mean? It means the other nations don't have powerful drives to do good or evil or whatever. Only Israel has the Yetzer Hara. So that really seemed to externalize it, and externalize, like, also the Yetzer Hara destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. What does that mean, the Yetzer Hara destroyed the Beis HaMikdash? Because it led to a sin, and our sin. That does sound like Yetzer Hara being seen much more here as less like a force of bad in the world. Okay? And as such, being read that way, it means something very different. It means at a metaphysical level, like, like the Yetzer Hara is out to to seduce the right, is being sent to seduce the good guys more than the bad guys, and therefore it focuses more on Yisrael and focuses more on the Talmidei Chachamim and so on. But that's a very different approach than the sort of psychological and internalized approach. Yes.
That passage from Yoel is in many nusics part of the Haftarah for Shabbat Shuvah.
Right.
So
yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about that issue about dealing with our right. Exactly. All right. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Yitzur Shel Adam. So now, now talking about the external and internal. Notice about also how it has now become a possessive. So it started with the Yetzer Hara as one entity that focuses on Yisrael, destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. Now it goes from being a single entity to being a possessive. Your Yetzer Hara. Right? It's now personalized, so you really see that shift. Yitzro shel Adam, your Yetzer, right? So Kol HaGadol Mechava Yitzro, his Yetzer is greater. So here it's the same point. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Yitzro shel Adam, the Yetzer of a person, so the one that's yours in particular, Mitgaber alav b'chol yom, that every day is getting stronger over you. Shne'amar, as it says, Rak ra kol hayom. It's only evil the whole day. So every day, it's like it doesn't lose any momentum. Okay, or the evil increases every day. Amar Reb Shimon Lakish, Yitzro shel Adam. Again, notice how we've switched from Yetzer Hara to Yitzro shel Adam, to making it yours. So it's talking very much internalized. The Yetzer of a person, Mitgaber alav b'chol yom u'mevakesh lamito. Not only is it getting stronger every day, it's trying to kill you, to bring you into the way of death. Shene'amar, probably religious death, spiritual death. So fer rasha l'tzadik u'mevakesh lahamito. The wicked one looks for the righteous and tries to kill him. If God were not there to help you, so eino yacholo, you would not have the strength on your own to withstand it. Shene'amar, as it says, Hashem lo ya'azvenu biyado. God will not abandon you into His hands. V'lo yarshi'enu bihi shafto. Will not let you become evil through His judgment, like through this evil person's or the Yetzer Hara's attempts. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Tana the house of Rabbi Shmuel, in paga b'cha menuvel zeh, if this disgusting one seizes upon you, so mashcheu lebeis hamedrash, schlep him into the beis medrash. So your Yetzer Hara has accosted you, you drag him in with you to the beis medrash, you make him your chavrusa. Means learn Torah. That will help you if you're seized by a desire. Open up a sefer, learn Torah. In Evanhu, and if it was as hard as a rock, Nimoach, it'll melt through the words of Torah. In Barzelu, and if it was like iron, mitpotzetz, it'll shatter. In Evanhu Nimoach, if it's like a rock, it'll melt by words of Torah. Dichsiv koi kotsamei luchulamayim, come all thirsty to the water. So Torah is like water. Dichsiv, and it says by water. Avanim shachaku mayim, stones were worn away by water. So the water will wear it away. In Barzelhu, if it's like iron, mitpotzetz, it'll shatter. T'chsiv, as it says, Halo kol dvarai ke'eshnu Hashem. So are my words like fire, says God. Kepatish yefotzetz sela, like a anvil, like a hammer, breaks a rock. Now, there's a little bit of a problem here that Rashi and Tosfos both pick up on, which is that the hammer is breaking the rock. It's not. We said, if it's iron, it'll shatter. But in the image, it's not the iron that's shattering, it's the rock that's shattering, right? You see the problem here, right? So, yes, everybody see the problem? So anyway, so Rashi says that it's not by the end of the pasuk of breaking the rock, it's that God's words are like fire. So what does fire do to iron? It melts it makes it spark. So that's what Rashi says is the image, not the breaking of the rock. Tosfos suggests reading the pasuk, patish and a hammer, if it's sela, a rock will break it. But that's a pretty bad read of the pasuk. Anyway, so the image is a little bit of a challenge. Anyway, bring it into the Beis HaMedrash, and the Torah will be able to make it dissolve. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman and Rabbi Yonasan. Yetzer Hara misito la'adam ba'olam hazeh. The Yetzer Hara seduces man in this world. Umeid alav l'olam haba, and then will come and be the enemy the witness to testify against you in the world to come. You come, do this sin, and then it seems like it's your friend, and then when it comes to the to come, it's going to turn around on you. It'll be and testify against you. Shene'amar, as the verse says, Mifunak minoar avdo. Literally, this means one who indulges from youth his slave. V'acharito, and the end, yehem manon, will be a manon. Now, so mifunak minor avdo means that somehow the Yetzer Hara is called your slave. Rashi says because ultimately it is under your control, but it has been seducing you and allowing you to indulge yourself since you've been young. And the end, it will be a manon. Now, what's a manon? So she came ba'atbach to Rabbi Chia, because in the atbach of Rabbi Chia, korim l'sahada, you call a witness manon, a manon. What does this mean? So this word, by the way, manon, this is a part of in what's it called, Eov, right? It's one of those words that, like, who knows what it means. So you get in your English meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So it's interesting that what Chazal are trying to do here is use a type of a letter substitution to figure out what this word means. So what's atbach? So you should know this, atbach. So what you do is you take the letters, right? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey.
Mishle.
What? Oh, Mishle. I'm sorry. Some of the other ones were from the Vav, Zayin, Chet. No. Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Now I got it confused. 1 minute. Oh, right, because the hay. Oh, right, because the hay is okay. Fine. Because the hay is the 5. Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet. Okay, so those are 1 through 9. Okay, and then you have Yud, Chaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei, Sadi. So that's 10 through 90, right? Right, everyone knows the number substitution here, right? Guf, Reish, Shin. Okay, so basically, do I have that right? Yeah. Okay. No. Kuf Tzadi. What? Yeah. Okay. 1 minute. Yeah. 1 minute. Kuf Tzadi. Yud Tzadi Kaf Pelim of Mem. Yeah, I got that. Oh, because okay, fine. Oh. Just 1 minute. Sorry. Kuf Reish Shin. Oh, huh? Oh, yeah, because Rashi does with whatever. Kuf Reish Shin Taf. Because then what you do is so you have the last ones here, and then you do the Sofi. So okay, so you have Samech Sofit, Mem Sofit. No, am I getting that wrong? I'm sorry. Mem Sofit, Nun Sofit. Excuse me. Mem Sofit, Nun Sofit. Pei Sofit. And Sadi Sofit. Okay, whatever. Okay, so anyway, fine. Anyway, you see what you do. That took way too long. You see what you do is you sort of fold over the ones, the tens, and these are the hundreds, and these are the Sophie letters, and then you do a letter substitution. Okay, so when you have an extra letter, when you have one letter, you substitute it. So anyway, if you do manon, so how does manon work? So the mem here substitutes with a samech, the nun, these are left together, so the nun substitutes with a hey, the vav substitutes with a dalet, and the nun substitutes with a hey. So manon becomes the sahada, which is witness. That took too long. Okay, anyway, moving on. Okay, so he'll be a witness for you in the end. Okay. Rav Huna Ramik. See, Rav Huna shows a contradiction. One verse says, "Ki ruach zinunim hit'ah," because a licentious spirit has led you astray. V'ksiv b'kirbam, in their midst. So is it external? This is the question, or is it internal? So b'tchila hit'am. Initially, it just led them off the derech, but it wasn't a completely internalized, or it was an occasional thing. And then in the end, it became inside them in their very midst, and it became internalized, and it became a regular, a regular leading astray, a regular sinning. Amarava, B'tchila karo it's sort of also like the Gemara before, although it's external, internal, the Gemara before about the spider web and the thick cords, about how it begins one way and it gets then more and more your practice. Amar Rava, says Rava, B'tchila karo holech, originally it was called a passerby, the Yetzer Hara, L'b'sof karo oreach, then it became a guest, spent a little time by you. It wasn't just an occasional, temptation. It became a guest. It was a more regular visitor. L'b'sof karo ish, and then it became like the balabayas. It became the owner of the house. Shene'amar, as we see by David, it says, this is the mashal given to him about the sin of Bathsheba by God. Vayavo holech liish. Remember the story about the two men, the one that had all these sheep, and the one that had just one little sheep. And then a visitor came to the rich man, and he didn't want to use any one of his sheep, so he stole the sheep from the poor man who only had one. So vayavo holech the ish ashir. So a passerby came to the wealthy man. Vayachamo lakachas mitzono bikaro. The wealthy man didn't want to take from his flock lasos oreach to make a meal for the guest. So he took the sheep of the poor man, and he made for the man who came to him. So the man who came to him started as a passerby, became an oreach, and then became an ish. Now, who's who in this mashal? Well, the sheep are the wives of David, and the one sheep is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. So those are the men, and those are the sheep. Who's the passerby? So who's the passerby that needs to be fed? So the passerby that needs to be fed is David's Yetzer Hara, right? So your sexual desire needed to be fed. You didn't want to satisfy it with your own wives. You had to take the wife of this one poor man. So this desire, right, starts off as a passerby, becomes a guest, and winds up being the man. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Aver Katan, and now we're really turning explicitly to a discussion of sexual desire. There's one little member, organ, Yesh lo Adam, that a man has. Mar Ivo Saveya, if he makes it go hungry, he'll be satisfied. Must be ra'ev, and if he satisfies it, he'll always be hungry. So the more he gives into the desire, the more it whets the desire. Shene'emar, as it says, Kemar itam vayisba'u. As they made it hungry, so they were satisfied. Or that's how it's being read. As opposed to they grazed, they were satisfied anyway. Amar Avchana, so basically a certain degree of abstinence is healthy for controlling your sexual desire. Amar Rabbi Chana bar Acha, Ami Beirav, Arba'a mitcharet alem HaKadosh Baruch Hu shebra'am. 4 entities God, regrets having created. Not literally, but sort of they create a lot of evil in the world. They're necessary, but they're do a lot of evil. The Eloheim, these are they: Galus, exile; Kazdim, the Ishmaelim, the Yetzer Hara. Galus, Tichsiv, Atam Mali Pon Hashem. What am I doing here? Says God. Ki lukach ami chinam. My nation have been taken for naught. So there's no purpose to it. Shouldn't have happened. There shouldn't have been Galus in the world. Kazdim Tichsiv, Hein Eretz Kazdim Zeha'am Lo Haya. This is the nation that hasn't been, meaning should never have been. I don't know exactly what relevance that has. Yishmaelim Dichsiv, Yishalyu Alim L'Shodedim will be tranquil in the tents will be tranquil for the robbers, not robbers, whatever. Anyway, something for those that. What's the word? I can't think of the right word. Anyway, ubetuchot lemargizei el, and will be will protect protection for those that anger God. Lasher hevi Eloha biyado, that God has brought through His own hands. So it means that God's created them, but there's a sense of regret, like shouldn't have created them because of this sense of that they'll be shodedim. Again, I can't come up with the right word. What it has there for shoded? Not provokers? No.
Like
highway robbers. Some of the robbers. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, the point of this is Yetzer Hara Dichsiv, the Yetzer Hara, as it says, Vasher Hare Osi, that I have done evil. So meaning, and this is being read in the context of the earlier verse, which is that it talks about God bringing those that have been led astray, the things that that I have done evil, like it was evil that I had created the reason for them to be led astray, or this evil thing that I had created, the Yetzer Hara, which shows a regret about it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Imali Shalosh Mikros Alalu, were it not for the following 3 verses, Nismotita Ragleim Shel Soneim Shel Yisrael, the legs of the haters of Israel would be would falter. Thank you, which means that the Jewish people would not have again, it's a euphemistic way of referring to the Jewish people, would not have what to withstand. Meaning these psukim give us a little bit of a defense of how we have sinned so much. So why? Vasher Hare Osi, God takes responsibility for creating the Yetzer Hara, so it's not all our fault. Like plaster, like clay in the hand of the potter, which means that God could give us the strength to be better. So it's sort of God has created us this way. Again, God has put this heart of stone in our hearts, and God could give us a heart of flesh. So in a way, God created us this way. So it's a little bit, again, doesn't mean it's, we're not responsible for our actions, but also we're human beings, and we were created with some of these frailties. Okay, Rav Papa Amar Af Mehai Nami, even from the following verse, I will give my spirit in you, which again means that God could give us a stronger spirit. Let's just do a little bit more. Vayar'eni Hashem arba'ach harashim. A vision in God showed me the 4 plowers. What were the 4 plowers? Maini arba'ach harashim, or the 4 craftsmen. So Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chazidim, Mashiach ben David. Do you hear the 4 craftsmen? Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, Eliyahu, v'Kohen Tzedek. So why are they craftsmen? So Rashi says Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef will bring about the Beis Hamikdash. So they'll fashion the Beis Hamikdash. Eliyahu made the altar at Har Carmel where he fought with the Nevi'ei Habal, and Kohen Tzedek is it reads it as Malki Tzedek, who was a son of Noach, who helped build the Teva. All right, so fine. So Masiv Rav Sheshes, Ihachi Hainu Tichsiv, if they're such good guys, what's meant by the next verse where God says, Vayomar Elai Elu HaKranot Asher Zaru et Yehuda. These are the horns that scattered Yehuda. So Hani L'shuva Asu, or something Yasuve Musi Yehuda. These are the ones that scattered Yehuda. Is that what these? I mean, these are good guys. So Amalei, no, Shafil is safe at the crowd. Look at the end of the verse. Vayavo Eila Lahacharidotam. He says, no, the end of the verse says, these, not these guys, not the 4 charashim, the other these were the horns that scattered Yehuda, and these 4 charashim are going to come to tremble them and to destroy these horns that carried away the land of Yehuda and that attacked Yehuda. You have to look at it inside, but basically it says, here are the 4 charashim, these are that's the horns that scattered Yehuda, and they will come to destroy those horns. So the these of the horns is not referring to the 4 charashim. All right? So he said, the 4 charashim are going to destroy the bad guys who destroyed Yehuda. So Amalei, he said to him, I should have known better than to compete with Chana by Agadata, which is pretty funny because actually it's pshat of the psukim, but okay, whatever. One last thing. Vayazeh Shalom Ashur. This will be the peace of Ashur. Ki yavo be'artzenu. When if Ashur comes against our land, ki yidroch be'armenosenu, and trample on our castle, meaning to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Ve'kimanu alav shiv'a ro'im v'shmona nesichei adam. What we will do, and that there will be 7 shepherds and 8 like leaders of people. And the end of the pasuk is that they'll take over the land of Ashur. They're trying to attack us. We'll take over their land with these 7 shepherds and 8 leaders. So Maniu Shiva Roin. Who are the 7 shepherds? David be'emtza, first David, Adam Sheitu Metushelach, Mimino, Avram Yaakov Moshe Bismolo. Okay, now, of course, they're all shepherds in the sense that they were leaders. Of course, the Marsha points out that most of them were actually literally shepherds as well, which is interesting. Okay, where exactly is Yitzchak is not clear. Fine. Umani Ushmona Nisiche Adam, who are the 8 leaders of people. Yishai V'Shaul V'Shmuel, Amos Tzfanya, Tzidkiah, U'Mashiach Ve'Eliyahu. And for homework, you can figure out what those 8 have anything to do with one another, because I don't know. Okay.
These are all anti-Christian.